Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of our live podcast from Showbie. And my name is Abdul Chauhan, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming the CEO of Explain Everything, Reshan Richards. Reshan, welcome to Showbie and welcome to our live podcast. Great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
So, for those of you that are kind of like joining for the first time or don't know what Showbie is, Showbie's a hybrid learning platform. It kind of facilitates deeper, richer feedback for teachers and students. And if you want to know more about that, then just go to showbie.com and have a look at things over there. You can also go to YouTube and search for Showbie. There's a bunch of videos on there that you can see. But today we're kind of going to speak to Reshan. We're going to speak about Explain Everything. We're going to kind of explore a little bit about Reshan and his background and where he comes from. And to begin with, I think Reshan and I have physically met before. We're part of the Apple Distinguished Educator community, which we've kind of had a bunch of global events in different parts of the world and so on, and we've met there. So, Reshan, welcome to the live podcast. And let's start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into education? Where did you start? What's your story?
Oh, well, sure. I'm happy to share that story. Got my first official teaching position, or I guess working with students when I was in my undergraduate studies. I volunteered as a coach, as a basketball coach at my old high school. I did not play on the basketball team, but I had a very good relationship with the coaching staff there. And I said, I have some capacity. Can I come and volunteer just as a way to help? And it worked out that they had just hired a new coach for their junior varsity team who had never worked in that role too. They said, all right, we'll just have two adults working there. But I immediately realized I just liked the whole rhythm of that type of work. And so I immediately, following my bachelor's study, was looking for teaching positions. I majored in music undergraduate, and I, in applying for schools and at independent schools where I didn't necessarily require a teaching certificate, I would have taken any teaching job. I was applying for science teaching, math teaching, music teaching, probably unqualified to do any of those. But it worked out that one school in New York City hired me as a fifth grade math teacher just to teach two sections. And then they would round out my full-time job role by being like a tier 1 tech support person. And again, completely unqualified to do either thing, but I took it. And I benefited that on both sides, on the tech side and on the teaching side. I had great mentors and who really helped show the way and modeled all sorts of good things. So I see that as completely helpful. But I immediately loved this intersection of technology and teaching. I was learning and doing all at the same time. And so eventually I got into serving in a tech coordinator, tech integrator capacity. And then over the course of my career, technology administrator, and then even, full school curriculum administrator. And then in parallel to that, and I'll stop this part of my introduction or story here.
Yeah.
When I was in I started a doctoral program, when I was working still at my first school, but in a different capacity. And the timing was that when I was just choosing my research direction, was when the first iPad came out. So I immediately was able to start to focus that side of my educational interest in investigating and understanding this kind of new hardware, but also just kind of new way of interacting with technology in school settings. So that's kind of the initial part of my story of and maybe you could see the pathways of how that starts to line up towards where things are today.
Yeah. So that must have been what, 2010-ish, 8, 9, something like that.
2010 was when I started my blog. Right. I never had a blog before, but I figured as somebody who's trying to, be a part of an ed tech community, I said, this is probably something I should do. And then I just started writing about iPad apps in 2010 and this was a time, Abdul, when every day it was a confined number of new apps that were released. It was small. So I downloaded every free app, and then every paid app that I saw that seemed relevant, I would reach out to the developers and say, "Hey, I have a blog. Can you send me a code?" And I was like, "I'll write about your app." And almost everyone was like happy to oblige.
Yeah,
And that's
that was.
ultimately how I met. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that was a really fascinating time. I remember we had just started our one-to-one program with iPad in our school, and it was kind of the idea that you could download software without having to have a CD.
Yeah.
It was kind of bizarre a little bit at the time, like how do you make, how does this work, kind of thing, and so on. And the whole app kind of economy was just getting kicked off, and there was some really cool things that were happening. And I must admit, I was a bit like you in that um teaching and technology, the two things came together, and kind of my passion lied there. But the idea of just downloading free apps and just seeing what they're about and what they can do, and then thinking, does this add value to learning or does it not add value to learning, was kind of really quite an interesting thing to do.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's how I ended up meeting my two eventual co-founders, is that Bart and Piotr had produced an app. It was launched in October 2010. It was called Photo Puppet, and they built it as just like a consumer funny animation app. And
Right.
and through the relationship that was formed from my downloading, reviewing it, and even sharing about it when I was kind of, I'd started at this point speaking and writing more about iPad apps, and I would always include them. And eventually, when I got serious about wanting to essentially build a research instrument as part of my studies, I included them in my outreach. And they eventually said, like, "Hey, would you actually want to try to make something commercial instead of just a kind of MVP, research tool?" And and that ultimately led to a partnership and the launch of Explain Everything in 2011, which was right around when the second generation iPad launched.
Yeah. I remember Explain Everything. It very quickly became a core tool in the school, and I do remember it was a time when like when there was a really good application in 2010 that came out on the iPad, we like teachers would just kind of be sharing that with everyone. We used to have like a show and tell kind of thing with teachers where people could go to, and one of the things that was pretty amazing was that the teachers that were it wasn't necessarily the technology focused teachers that would discover the new applications. Like suddenly any teacher was able to download an app, be able to use it, and suddenly they're using it, and everybody else is kind of discovering it, and they were able to then demonstrate of how they actually use it. And I remember Explain Everything being one of our kind of core apps right there. And even today, I would say that's probably the case for a lot of schools that use iPad as well. So tell me about Explain Everything. Like, how has that kind of evolved? What's happened with that? I know there's like two versions of the app as well now. What are you seeing with teachers and different markets, different schools, different stages of education, and so on?
So I think, like any tool that's good, I would hope that you would see it kind of always be in a process of iteration and evolution. And so since the launch in 2011 to now, more than 10 years later, right, it's gone through all kinds of evolutions, as I said. I mean, some of the notable ones are it's no longer restricted just to iPad or even iOS. It the original kind of driving thing that we were supporting was being able to make whiteboard videos, right? Teachers, but more importantly, students, like, have it as a way to demonstrate understanding in ways that other methods may not allow. And
Yeah.
that still remains like a core and very, very important um, use case, if you want to call it that, but really kind of a need that we're always trying to address and improve upon. But then over time, we saw other things start to emerge. So, for example, there were a lot of teachers who were using it for instructional delivery just to be able to have a good whiteboard to share over their TV. or now these days to have a whiteboard to share over video conference. So absent of needing to do any recording, just using the whiteboarding tools to be able to visually present ideas. So that's become a more intentional space for us to try to figure out how do we make that work while still preserving the choice. And then, of course, we've added this collaborative element. So now, how do you have multiple people being able to author on the whiteboard, both in real time, but even asynchronously? But still, the core of it is always the same. Like, how do we help people communicate better, right? And how do we help people demonstrate what they know or share an idea? And most importantly, how do we make it possible for students to do that? And then in as authentic of a way as possible. So we try not to, while we want to make things like feel and look nice, we also don't want it to ever feel like somebody would question whether or not a human generated this. Because I think that that's a very important thing if you're really trying to get into human development, that like those things that are produced, there should never be a question of, can I see the human, the person behind this artifact, this video, this visual that was created?
I think that's kind of really powerful, because like technology that is humanized as such has a lot of kind of value to people, right? Because it's a real person that's speaking about it. And I think like certainly a technology that is being used in education, if that technology has connect to a real person, the student knows that this is my teacher that's produced this for us. There's a degree of personalization there. There's context. There's kind of intonations in the explanations and all of that that becomes quite valuable. I'll tell you a story. This is kind of quite an interesting one. So in my hometown, where I am in the UK, just outside of Manchester, there's a local school. It was my old primary school that I used to go to. And at that time, I was kind of traveling a lot with doing a lot of stuff for Apple in different places, and then kind of visiting schools and countries and all this kind of stuff. But there were times when I would be here back home, and the head teacher of that school contacted me to say, "Hey, Abdul, we've got half an hour. We've just given teachers iPads. At the end of the day, I wonder if you could come and do something." And I'm like asking her, "Okay, what do you have on your iPads and this and that and so on?" And she said, "You've only got half an hour, 30 minutes, and that's it." So I said, "Okay." And I remember going there, and I said to them, "Right, I'm going to show you something, and we've only got 30 minutes, and I think that your whole kind of approach to learning will change." And I got them to all download Explain Everything, and I showed them, like, how to do the annotations and record their voice. That's it, nothing else, right? And then whilst they were kind of playing around with that, I asked them to do an example. So they were doing math examples and all this kind of stuff and so on. Whilst they were doing that, I made a YouTube kind of quick Gmail account and a YouTube channel thing for them. And by the end of that 30-minute, there was about 30 or 40 math videos that had been uploaded to YouTube. And I just said to them, "Hey, you guys have just created a YouTube channel in 30 minutes and you've already got content on there. All you have to do now is just tell your parents that all your math examples are on here, and you're good to go." And it was transformational. The school's one-to-one now with technology. They use Showbie, they use Explain Everything, they use all of that. But I think the power of simplicity is actually quite key in getting people to understand what the possibilities are with this. And I think Explain Everything is a great example of that. I don't know, maybe you kind of come across stories like this in other places as well.
Yes, and thank you for sharing. That was very inspiring to hear, and or maybe I should say very fulfilling, right? Because it's intent and impact, right? So the intent of what we build, and then hearing about it actually being positively impact, even if it's just in those moments, is always a good reference point for us. I think that it's hard with the simplicity side of things, because the technology itself is really quite complex, right? And I always think about the difference between like something being easy and something being simple. And in many ways, we don't want to make it simple, but we want to make it easy, right? So like we want to make it easier for people to do complex things. And at the same time, there are a lot of just simple tools that are easy. There's also probably simple tools that are made way too complicated and hard. But I think one thing that's always been encouraging for us is that people find those entry points, just like that exercise that you shared, and that we have to hope that we've provided something that can grow with people as they grow. So as their readiness for more complexity comes in, that like we're able to match that in kind of developmentally appropriate ways, whether it's an adult or a child.
Rishan, where do you see like the use of explain everything in one particular band of education, like K-12, or are you seeing things like post K-12 as well, and so on? Is there a particular favorite of where you see explain everything being used?
I think you see it in, I think you can call it like, K-12 as kind of the primary place, but then within that, you might find like this band of, in the US, we'll say from 3rd grade to 9th or 10th grade. So even like within their more central band, part of it is just the dexterity and facility of the students, and some of it's just kind of just the age appropriateness or things with the content. Again, it's not because we've dictated it that way. It's just how that lines up. I could check the data though, and maybe I'm wrong. That's more anecdotally of where I think. But that being said, we see people in early childhood settings working with 2 and 3-year-olds have ways, whether it's just making instructional content or building a digital manipulative center as part of some sort of broader learning thing. And then, professional school, graduate school, medical school professors using it for direct instruction or for facilitating group activities. So that too is kind of intent and impact, to not create something that's so narrowly for a particular age level or a subject area discipline, but rather just something that anybody who's a teacher, right, is able to use towards whatever their designated goal is.
Yeah, and I quite like the collaborative nature of this as well. That's kind of been that's a pretty powerful feature that I think that's been added to explain everything. The fact that a teacher can draw something, annotate, and so on, and others can join in to that session and be able to contribute to that as well. For me, that's really powerful. Do you see that? Did you see the impact of that feature during COVID and times like that, the lockdowns?
Yes, definitely. Oh, my camera went to sleep. It'll come up in a second.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So definitely we saw a greater interest really in folks just trying to have the same optionality that they were used to in the in-person classroom, now translated digitally. So certainly they look for digital tools that support any kind of collaborative experience. I think one thing that's quickly learned, especially with like a whiteboarding or kind of any kind of inking tool, is that in the real world, right, in the physical world, you're never going to have 2 people writing on the same pixel, right? Like if you and I each picked up a marker, we are not going to be able to write on the same space, or we'll know each other's proximity enough to be like, I'm going to give Abdul the left side of the board and I'll take the right side. But now digitally, you have to find new ways to kind of compensate for the absence of those kind of norm setting things, right? So it requires this extra thought, and you can find clever ways to digitally scaffold it so you don't have 2 people trying to write on the same square centimeter of space. But you have to think about that now, because otherwise what you see in these collaborative elements is, these a little bit of chaos. But it's good to see people like learning about all of that. And I think that especially for this potential future world where, whether we like it or not, that there's going to be this fluctuation of in-person or hybrid or fully online, that having, your toolkit, your tool set of things like a Showbie, like an explain everything, like whatever else might be in it, but that you're able to pick up and utilize regardless of the kind of audience composition. I think that's going to be kind of this new expectation of today's teachers, to be prepared, right? Not to go nuts designing a lesson for all 3 configurations every single day, but being kind of nimble enough to say, like, I've got this regiment of tools and I know in a reasonable amount of time how I can make the necessary adjustments, for whatever those changing conditions might be. And I think collaborative tools that provide choice, I think, become very important to that toolkit.
I think that's kind of really, really quite powerful. I know during like a lot of the webinars that I did for Showbie during lockdown, there was a lot of overlap between teachers using, and even now the conversations I'm having, I was having a conversation with school this morning, um, where explain everything, and they kind of using that for the teachers kind of direct instruction tool, but also then getting students to use it in the same way to be able to explain their thoughts and understanding, and getting that metacognitive process out verbally and so on, and then putting that into the kind of Showbie workflow so that it's there for them to use. And one thing that a teacher said to me that was really quite powerful was that she's a maths teacher. I think she's in Dubai, and when I met with her, she said, like, my planning has completely changed because of Showbie and Explain Everything. That workflow has been kind of completely changed, because all my explanations I do in Explain Everything, and then I've got it there on Showbie for the kids to watch. They can watch it as many times as they want, and they've got access to it. And I suppose, and then this was before COVID. COVID came along, lockdown happened, and this workflow just kind of amplified across the school. But I can kind of see that as a really kind of powerful thing, to be able to kind of have digital workflows that are now significantly different from like traditional workflows that were present in schools.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, in dealing with all of these challenges that have been onset by this pandemic, I think those who pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, were already either kind of leading edge when it comes to exploring choices with technology, or at least had kind of the courage to dip their toes in. I feel like they were better equipped to deal with the ambiguity and the kind of uncertainty brought upon through this. And now, again, that's not to be a knock on the people who were not yet. It's just kind of a truth, right? That there was just already a mindset existing of like, I'm going to try to see and understand how can I connect from a range of choices to a particular objective. And that mindset should always be consistent regardless of the uncertainty. Now, what you're actually going to do is going to change depending on those variables.
Absolutely. So Rashan, it's kind of like, these podcasts are always really interesting. I start off like just kind of talking, and then the next time I look at the clock and it's like 20 minutes have gone, kind of thing. But what's next for Explain Everything? Where do you, what kinds of things do you see it? Because I always look at Explain Everything and I'm always still in awe. Certain features that I just see on there and I just think, wow, man, this is really amazing. Like, for example, you guys have got a browser that you can put right in the kind of whiteboarding area, and it's active. You can browse and you can annotate and you can move it about and so on. I've never seen that anywhere else. Like, even till now, I've just never. And you had it really early on. It's not like it's a new addition. I find things like that really innovative, and I think the possibilities with that are really fascinating in many ways as well. But so what's next? Like, what other things are you kind of thinking about working on and so on? Or is that going to be top secret kind of thing?
It's all top secret. No, I think there are going to be some cool things that will emerge over the next couple of months. I think in general, one of the challenges is the whole conversations around kind of innovating. So on one side, from a design perspective, you really want to just design based on kind of stated and understood needs of somebody. But then on the same side, or on the other side, is there might be things that are unconsidered needs that folks don't even know that it's something that could help them. So like you said, this kind of inserted web browser feature, it's almost something somebody wouldn't have even considered doing.
Yeah.
But then like once it's there, all of a sudden it's like, okay, wow, this allows me, this actually is addressing a need that, because of for whatever reason, just didn't rise to the surface because everybody assumed it would be not possible to do. So it just gets like buried. And I think that's always exciting, but you have to find that right balance so that, you're, helping to meet people where they are, but at the same time, helping to lead them towards these like new possible futures.
Absolutely. I think there's huge opportunities in these areas, and I've kind of seen this in a number of different places where teachers just didn't know that they needed something until they had it, and then they discovered it, and then it kind of becomes like the norm in the way in which. And like for me, I had that kind of I suppose that kind of an experience right at the beginning when we first looked at Showbie, because they had the voice note feature. And the fact that you could add voice notes and annotate documents with voice notes was actually quite a powerful thing. And again, that was probably something that teachers would not have. Somebody came up with that idea, and it's worked so well. And now it's like, the normal workflow for a lot of schools that are kind of using Showbie, or even that are using Google and Microsoft and using Showbie alongside.
I mean, I don't know if you remember, because you were probably working at schools. So there was a web-based software, and this is probably 2005, 2006. It was called Writely, and it was one of the first platforms where you could have people typing together on the same doc. And of course, Google bought them and turned it into the whole underpinning for the whole Google Docs suite.
Yeah.
But at that time, before that, nobody was really saying like, oh, I wish I can have multiple people typing in this Word doc at the same time. It just didn't even cross the mind of like something to solve for. And then like here, this tiny little disruption comes in, and all of a sudden now people could not live without in schools collaborative authoring in a G Suite or iWork or wherever it might be.
Absolutely. Rashan, tell me, and I'm just going to throw this in now, because obviously Apple have got their launch tonight as well, right? They're going to be launching new devices and all that kind of stuff and so on, which is kind of interesting in some ways, because I suppose I always look at kind of events like that, whether it's Google or whether it's Apple that are doing these things, or Microsoft, and being able to see like what impact is that going to have in education. And I think one of the things that is kind of popping up more and more is like the whole AR stuff, and augmented reality, and what does that look like, and so on. And I've seen some really great apps and tools that really lend itself, and in some ways it's technology looking magical, but actually I think there's an opportunity potentially here for educators. So what are your thoughts on AR?
So I think with both AR and VR, I think a lot of it has to do with the two elements. One is hands-free experiences. So I think that to really feel immersion or to do something else, like you need your hands free, because if you're using your hands to do the viewing, it becomes very hard to do anything else on top of it.
Interactive,
so that's part one. And then I guess complementary to that is that the heads up displays or the headgear or whatever it has to be, that the price points for the really high quality ones have to come down so it's more accessible. But two, that as they continue to improve the resolution, that also matters, because for real immersion, it's all about like that video quality, because otherwise you get these dizzying effects. So both the video and just the kind of latency, because I think even with some of the AR applications, you never really feel fully immersed, right? Because of and it's not just because it's a layer, but it's also like a slight bit of lag, the kind of goofy positioning. So I think it's continuing to converge on this point of like, indistinguishable from reality, which may or may not be a good thing. But I think, this immersive element or potential is really important, because I think that type of immersive experiences just makes you a more empathetic individual, right? You just can understand a situation or context better, and then hopefully be kind of a kinder, more considerate human.
I think that kind of technology will be kind of really interesting to see how it develops, how it grows, and where it goes, and so on as well. Rashan, we've kind of come to time. I just want to say thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy schedule and kind of sharing your thoughts with us as well. Wishing you lots of luck with Explain Everything, and really looking forward to kind of more features coming on there and seeing the journey for Explain Everything. And obviously for us folks at Showbie, kind of seeing even more integration and more use cases with schools and so on. But thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic having you on board.
Oh, thank you, Abdul. And thank you, Showbie, for having me.